I guess it's still morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I have left the academic space for a long time. I'm now in the field. So, and in the field, two things drive our actions. What is propelling you, that is how much comes in, and what is outcome, that is what you are giving out. So I might be speaking from the perspective of what pays our flight to this place, and at the end, those who convene here. That's the practical sense of what we are talking about. So I will start by congratulating the conveners of this conference on a very timely and important subject, emerging trends in the Global South, impact on world Christianity. And again, for those who were here yesterday, we settled the quarrel on Global South and North. So please don't ask any question of where I align, whether I believe in the political social construct or in the normative framework that North and South are just creations of people. So we are not quarreling with that. Like Cyril said, from Global South, Nigeria is recorded as one. So, in many parts of the world today, religion is a sensitive and tricky and irritable topic, often suggestive or associated with causes of conflicts, hostilities, and other negative outcomes. To stay safe, we habitually prefer to adopt the proverbial ostrich approach and most often avoid it in any conversation, whether formal or informal. More so today that political correctness, whatever that means, is the new normal of staying sane and being accepted. Yet, religions have always been part of human civilization. Asking the question of the interface of religion and social realities, of what we know of this mix, so John Talbot in Religion Trust regarded religious faith and practice as a dynamic for pro-social force, a transformative force for good in the world, part of and even source of solutions and problems that would also need a range of faces as we go through the realities of life, such as warfare, poverty, and prejudice. For today, if I zero down to the nexus between the Global South and emerging realities and the world Christianity, we can also acknowledge the fact that Christianity is a global phenomenon that has shaped and that is shaped by and has shaped the dynamic forces throughout history, evolving in response to cultural, demographic, and technological shifts. In fundamental theology, for those of us who study theology, we learn that faith conditions and is the conditioning of the culture and social milieu of its encounter. Using the word of Veronique Boyer, many societies in the Global South provide particularly fertile grounds for the expansion of what we might call religions of salvation, especially the more dynamic among them. The absence or withdrawal of central government and established religions, just like we've been hearing from experiences, Kenya and otherwise, and the rise of individuation, growing inequality and poverty, and the omnipresence of religion in many societies and languages are all factors which have been shaped and help us to prepare for the terrain of religion and faith and social issues encounter. I personally subscribe to the school of thought that believe that while there is a wealth of literature discussing the historical trajectory of Christianity, namely how and why of the phenomenal growth of Christianity in the Global South in comparison to the Global North, there exists a noticeable research gap in comprehensively addressing the interactive engagement of the faith with contemporary global trends as undertaken or missioned in this event we are holding in this week. And so for that reason, once again, I thank Joe and Cyril and all those who made this possible for us to have a turning of our gaze to these roads. Therefore, seizing this auspicious moment, my keynote reflection in this conversation will focus on one of the defining emerging realities of today's Africa, namely the migration surge with all its complexities, hopes, and anxieties. My audacious, or rather ambitious, submission is that the fate of Christianity in Africa and the entire global South is contingent to honest actions and inactions in the face of the emerging realities of these histories and civilizations. So, it seems that was in kind of getting myself into this space to talk. So what am I supposed to talk on? I'm talking about migration and its impact in the African history, especially how it interfaces with church's responsibility or church's presence in it. And we all believe that migration and religion have enjoyed an age-long relationship, sometimes healthy, sometimes problematic. At certain times, the relationship has also been symbiotic because migration has been a vehicle for religious propagation. On the other hand, religion has aided migration dynamics in terms of the root causes. In other words, in migration discourse, we talk about push and pull factors, as well as the choice of destinations where you go to. Because some countries are receptive to some religion and others are not to some, as we experienced during the 2015 crisis in Europe and the Middle East. The interplay of religion and migration has gained currency in recent times following the largest movement of migrants and refugees, the one we call the largest since after the Second World War, erupted by Syria crisis and the instabilities in the eastern side of Mediterranean Sea, pressure from on the border the northern walls from Central and South of America, xenophobic, racial discriminatory utterances and behaviors towards migrants, IDPs, refugees, asylum seekers sometimes carry religious undertone. Africa occupies a significant place in the entire global migration dynamics with all its challenges, gains, and prospects. This includes all that religion brings to the conversation. As a faith with deep migratory undertone, Christianity, especially as lived in the African soil, cannot be silent over the tide of the religion and migration nexus. This reflection which we are having today, therefore, considers the intersection of religion and migration as a serious component of the migration discourse on the one hand and faith discourses on the other hand. That cannot be glossed over or entirely overlooked. Then it will focus on the Christian faith, particularly from the Catholic prism, in exploring the impact of religion on African migration, both in terms of being a contributor to and as well as being a relevant stakeholder in the management of the African migration surge. The dimension taken in this reflection utilizes experiences of the faith actors in other continents, especially the Latin and North America, in interrogating the role and involvement of the African church in the African migration discourse, as well as the consequences of our silence and inaction. I don't think I would bother us so much on the dynamics of global migration so that we might have time to interact, because somehow each and every one of us sitting in this conference today, even virtually, have some interface with migration and religion as it concerns the global South today. Many of us are here because we are migrants, or somebody who brought us here was a migrant or remains a migrant. I'm not stimulating anything, I'm only stating facts that history holds. And so, let me therefore want to go directly to the fact that there has been so many actions put forward by different sectors of the world to respond to the global migration issues. And it is also very interesting that the church, particularly the Catholic Church, has been a very forerunner in the propagation of migration for the well-being of migrants. It has played key roles in responding to various negative impacts of migration on migrants. It has also been a key beneficiary of migration proceeds. Many churches in Africa is growing today because the diaspora continually, either through tithes or through prayer points or through direct engagement with their churches, contribute to the well-being of their churches. But unfortunately, when issues bothering the well-being, security, human rights of those migrants happen, the church might remain silent or pretend not to hear. Again, that is African church. That is the Catholic Church being part of it. We know that it is not just a new thing. In 2019, when Pope Francis was inaugurating the 2019 World Day of Migrants and Refugees, he uses the caption saying, "It is not just about migrants." This initiative endeavors to make us to know that the action towards protecting migrants encourages productive engagement to harness the benefit of migration and to engage governments and relevant actors to reduce the causes of forced migration and also dissuade susceptible young men and women from engaging in irregular migration. These teams provide the initiative for honest investigations into the depth of the root causes of migration, especially the irregular and forced migration. The goal is not to stem or stop migration, but rather to ensure a better management of migration so that migration is for the benefit of all. And I don't want to leave this podium for making somebody think that our engagement today is to stop migration. That in international migration governance, what we talk about is effective harnessing of the potential of migration and limiting the tendencies of its problematic, so that all those involved in migration are also beneficiaries of it. And all those include individuals and countries, whether it is origin, transit, or destination, as the case may be. Church is a key benefactor and a key stakeholder. So what we are saying is, how does the church interface with migration issue add to its contribution to making the face of the earth what God wants it? In other words, for people to realize the fullness of life that God has given them, even undertaking migration processes in their life. So what I want us to do today is, let me quickly zero down. I'm not going to go into what migration is in general, because that we can read if my paper makes it to appear in the volume. You can read what that is. If it doesn't make it, you can call me up and I'll chat you up on that. As I said, I'm at... So I'm not going to bother so much about the intrigues of migration as it is in the global space, but I'm going to go straight to African migration, since I am speaking from the global south and what that means. So first thing I want to establish is that Africa, as I said in the earlier introduction, shares from the entire story of international migration or global migration in its entirety, both the positive and the challenges. You know, today in the world, statistics believe that there are over 1 billion people on the move, over 1 billion, and this is aggregated to different sectors. About 281 million of such are referred as international migrants, that is, those who have left their countries to other places. And over 760 million are regarded as internal migrants, that is, those who move within their countries, have not crossed any external border. And within this category, we also have about 26.5 that are regarded as refugees. Nothing is said about asylum seekers. Refugee is when you seek asylum and you got protection from the country that promised to protect you, then you get a refugee status. So we don't know the number of persons seeking asylum, because such data can come from administrative sources only, or from services that people render. But many a time they are considered as non-traditional data source. So some statistics may not use them. We also know that about 65 million people are displaced among this category of people on the move. And when we are equating this, putting Africa on the map or the dot of it, we also find that Africa occupies a big space. We know that 25.4 million people live within the African continent. 25.5 million live within the African continent as migrants. And that puts Africa as fourth on the strata of those continents with high migration, following immediately after Asia even before Europe and others. So, and it is often also said that migration of Africa moves from Africa to Europe and North America. But the truth is not actually as it's been said or contained in that narrative. Sometimes there are populistic narrative which is conditioned by the either political scenario of the country who pay or who inspired people who make such adverts. Statistics let us know that Africans there is no African country on the list of the first 20 most migrating countries in the world. And it will be surprising because the narrative we hear is that Africans are everywhere in Europe and North America, not ever. And even when Africans move, the statistics again show that 80% of African migration is within the African continent. 90% in West Africa rotate to West Africa. 60% of that in East Africa rotates within East Africa. And South Africa share the same thing. So what we are saying in perspective is that sometimes the narrative that are sometimes pursued by maybe journalism that is fed by nationalistic tendencies make us to, or those we call anti-migration narratives, push it that way, especially when you focus on Africa. So again, I'm not going to bother to go beyond the prehistory story about African migration, starting from the movement of the Homo sapiens and then whichever other Homo again. Yes, so I'm not bothering about that because it may not be of any use to this conversation. What I'm considering is for the migration that we have witnessed in the last centuries of our time, which reckons high and in the study of migration dynamics in the world. They said in the early 19th century, when millions of Africa were exported, I use the word, exported like objects from their countries to the other continents, that began the very first movement of official forced migration propelled by interests of individuals who saw other individuals as products of management. And so many of these, you might also have been hearing of the number of deaths on the Mediterranean Sea. It did not start with the 2013 Lampedusa experience, which Prince Francis responded to as describing as the globalization of indifference, where people said nothing. This thing goes back to the early 19th century, where weak Africans who were moving to Europe or to the New World, because they could no longer make the journey, were thrown into the sea to feed the shark or whoever was willing to eat them. So when we talk about the Mediterranean Sea, Atlantic Sea, Ocean, or even the deserts, the hawks and the vultures around there must have known the taste of African blood much before the 2013 experience. We also know in terms of contribution of African migrants, that African migrants are one of the very, very key vital migrants in development in different countries, right? And what we are talking about here, I will just give you a quick statistic on referring to North America, but even though it's a little stale in terms of sources, which academics will ask me, why did they not update it? You can go and update it yourself. But to help us to do this conversation, a research by an American who propelled trying to stop the narrative of anti-migration, especially focusing on Africa, that was discussed as a shithole. Whose border must be, for whom the border must be tighter. They said in 2018, African migrants in the U.S. were reported to have contributed more than $10.1 billion in federal taxes, 4.7 billion in state and local taxes, and most importantly, they have significant economic clout to the point of 40.3 billion in spending power. Of course, you know our people. We make the money, we spend it. But then there's another narrative that we have to put in perspective also. You often hear it, maybe somebody speaking to you, that you people come here, you make money and take it to your place. That is not true. And when somebody tells you that it's not true, statistics show us that 85% of the money migrants made are spent in the country of destination. Just take yourself as an example. The little everyday activity you do to move from your hostel or your room, your house, to come to your school, go back, all this contribute to the economy. What you send back home at the end is 15% of what you earn. And so if that is the case, we are key contributors to development. And we also know that Africa is a major recipient of remittances from their migrants abroad. The remittances, we always categorize them into economic and social. Africa is actually the fourth on the whole ladder of this. And what is it we contribute? Those money we send to our homes, many of them are private personal money for household assistance. But some countries have begun processes of managing and harnessing that for their own national development. Kenya is one example that has done very structural things in terms of setting up a remittance corridor so that their money comes directly through their banks. And so I think in 2012 or thereabouts, Kenya presented in one of our international global events that instead of borrowing from World Bank or the other thing, they borrow from their commercial bank. And that is because of the flow of the money that the migrants are depositing in their countries to do that. Nigeria has actually done more also in terms of institutionalizing migrants' contribution by establishing the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, having policies that manage such, develop what we call migration dialogue processes, where this diaspora come every day to make their contribution in development of their country. For those who know Abuja very well, the Katampe Xris of Abuja is originally called Diaspora Village. And that was Obasanjo's project to bring Nigerians to come back and invest in Abuja. But of course, that land has been taken over by politicians and then share the dividends as it were. So if when you are buying land in Nigeria, please shine your eye, if you know what that means. So, having contributed all this money, we also see that the migrants themselves are very well treated in some places. Sometimes I used to use myself as an example of somebody who has benefited from migration and has suffered migration for what it is. So I describe myself as an experience of migration for the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, having come and spent time in North America, Canada, and the US, I'm able to get knowledge. I was able to get knowledge. I was able to make new acquaintances, make new connections that take me 6 or 10 me up to today, right? But I've also experienced such hostile moments where you ask yourself, but why should I be here? You know, because somebody looks at you and consistently asks you, where do you come from originally? And I keep asking that question each day for what it is. I thought it was asserting my identity, but I didn't know it was all consistent reminding of that you are not from here. So you have to be where you ought to be. And such also go with it, some other issues that go with it, racial, xenophobic, and all the rest of it. And also have opportunity, tendencies where I come to airport, no matter which passport I carry, if unfortunately the green passport is the first one they see, they pull me aside. And then when they begin interrogating until I put the other passport, they say, oh, you should have told us earlier. So the issue is my passport determines who and how I will be treated. And that is the migration issue. In 2010, I joined a group on Obamaga pilgrimage. For those who are Germany, know Obamaga, a 10-year pilgrimage. And we're all moving from Canada to Europe. At every migration spot we got, I was pulled away. And every other person we wait to go and see where this man came from and why he has to be with this troop. And so I have to deal with that. Almost for 15 days we were on that trip. And somebody came to me and asked me, why not consider get Canadian passport and stop this wahala? Maybe that's how I got mine, you know. And it has helped me, but also embarrassed me a lot. One day I was coming back from Geneva with my colleagues from Africa. We actually went to a program to assess the Nigeria and the Africa-European Migration Partnership. And we got to Ethiopia. And my colleague said, oh, can we not stay behind as since my flight was the next day, can we not just stay behind and then have a continuation of our conversation? I said, why not? And each of them had European passports. So I pulled my Nigerian passport to go to pass through the immigration. The man said, oh no, you don't have visa, so you can't enter Ethiopia. Just stay there. When your flight comes the next day, you can go. And we go back and forth. Can I get visa on arrival? He said, no, you cannot get visa on arrival. So my colleague behind said, are you not? You still remember the other passport? I said, yes. And then he said, bring it. And I brought out my Canadian passport and went to the same man. He said, oh, sir, welcome. Thank you. Oh, Ethiopia, this is so good. This is Africa talking to Africa. So we are talking about, when we talk about the experiences of migrants, sometimes we look beyond ourselves to think it is what other people do to us. We also see from the African migration study, especially those prepared by the African African Development Bank, tells us that Africa is one continent in the world that we still need visa to enter 55% of our countries in our continent. While other countries are doing Schengen, are doing North America, whatever, Asia are proposing things, we still do not do that. In 2018, Africa passed what we call a free movement protocol in Africa. But that has not taken first because African countries are still dragging first. Of course, some other forces external are also making it tough because African migration free movement will impact what we call the free movement into their territories that they are afraid that we could come into. So why do I paint this picture as it were? It's to let us know what African migration surge is about. In Nigeria, that's what we call the Japa syndrome, which didn't start with this 2023 administration, but progressed and has now heightened at this moment. It is this tendency to run. We say to Nigeria, we just want to get out. The get out doesn't mean where you are going to, but you are out of the border because of how economic and political security issues are making us not be home in our homes. And so we are driven out of our place. Now, we have a church that its root is also deep in migration. Most of us who received Christianity received it from migrants who came to us as missionaries. They were also those who followed a process at a time where colonialism was another way of renaming people and giving them new identity. And those people who had come to us did not experience what we are experiencing now because in their own, the time they came, they were able to be who they are. If they didn't want who they were, they changed it. And they sometimes make their own host to adapt to who they are themselves. And this was how our own missionaries sometimes received our faith. So, but in sincerity, I would also want to say that the church, especially the Catholic Church, has accompanied migrants so well in the journey of protecting migrants. And I want to use historical fact. In 1914, Pope Pius V, noticing the movement of Italians into New America or the New World, asked that the whole Christians should pray for these migrants. And a few months after, Pope Benedict XV, his successor, instituted what we call today the Day of Migrants. Again, that has continued to grow on. What this asks for is for us to provide principles of migrant spiritual and economical support from the church. Those of you who are conversant with the Vatican, you know that there used to be what we call Pontifical Council for Pastoral Care of Migrants and Itinerants, which has been subsumed into what they call now Migrants and Refugees sector of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. I see this as institutionalization of church's action in terms of what it can do to help migrants. Since then, following that Pope Pius V activity, I don't know if you know about the Scabranians, right? The Scabranian mission. They are actually instituted to follow the migrants of Italy. And that is what their major mission is up to today. to provide protection, support for migrants who are, but now they have expanded beyond Italians to also look at other migrants. There were also other activities following reintegration of traffic victims and all those that many churches are doing. Churches are also promoting the care of migrants in their various places. I know when we were in Toronto, we had what we call the Igbo Church, and it was specifically to provide spiritual support to our Igbo community. And I know in many other countries or of destinations, there are some part of that, Korean churches, Vietnam churches, and all those, that is taking care of our migrants. So what I am concerned about here in our own is the study of the Christian perspective on migration from Africa. I would rather say this, that from the African perspective of migration and religion interface, the study, there is a varied way this thing is studied. And most of the times, it is studied from the point of view of what religion does to migrants from Africa in their new places, the type of new religion they take up to their places. I have heard about Christianity, the what do you call that, transdenominationalism or transnationalism? I don't know which one it is. Transdenomination. Yes. I know if you go to some streets in the US, you'll be seeing Mountain of Fire, you'll be seeing Equa, you'll be seeing all these other things. That is our faith, traveling with our people to be sure that they don't lose what they have, especially in this time of the world where everything can become anything else. But what we did not see in the African church's response in the issue of migration, remembering the two dimensions of migration governance focus, working on the root causes, what caused migration, and there are two major root causes. One is the deficiencies in the country of origin and the intricate relationship between capitalism of the developed world that continues to create opportunities or tendencies of lack so that these other people will go out. So we have not seen the church play a key role in responding to that. That is why we ask the question, why would the church that is so deep-rooted in migration not know that its own response should also focus on this type of attitude? I think the first thing that comes to our mind is that this could be some residue, a nostalgic feel of its missionary history, where we used to talk in Toronto there, Fugamundi spirituality, propagated by some people here, who makes us to look who make us to look up heaven and then forget about the earth. While those here are grabbing everything here, hoping that when we reach there in heaven, they might actually be the first to answer their names. So our faith has taken that direction in that way. So looking at that and embodying myself with the question of working for migrants is not just about migrants, but about us as well, as Pope Francis said. My proposal here is, can we reassess our response and seek alternative ways for comprehensive Christian response? And what I'm seeing and what I'm proposing by here is what we call towards a theology of migration conversation. And I am building that from taking a leap from Jürgen Habermas's theory of public space and the communicative action that believes that it is only when there is a space and there is a means for people to talk about their issues that social realities can be addressed. And one key thing that Habermas put on that, for you to participate in the social space, the public space, you must first and foremost identify within yourself what we call your own perspective, so that you don't come to the space empty-handed. So what do we then come with as Christians in responding to international migration conversation? I said we can go back to our rich culture and faith. There are so many biblical things we can draw from the Bible to build our own Christian engagement in the international migration conversation. And so, two things I drew up for us here: suggestion on how to develop African migration theology. First, when I looked at a kind of a literature review on this, I saw that there are a number of things that are written about African migration. But what happened here is that all these writings have consistently looked at one dimension, that is protecting or providing for the assistance of migrants and how the church is going about it. So what I think is lacking is an urgent conversation among all these talks. You know, this group are servicing these other people. So how do we bring together these talks in such a way that they can become what the intention is as the African brand of the section of migrants and refugee section is saying, let us have an African focus. So I'm taking, for instance, if you go to the incarnation, I was talking about vertical and horizontal Christology. The vertical and horizontal Christology that is migrational, the incarnation and salvation on the same line of the vertical. Christ coming down on earth and then Christ going back to heaven. And then Christ's relationship in terms of migration from place of birth to the other places. So if we do that, and before Cyril would give me the other finger, he told me what it meant, I will now tell you the methodology I propose for doing this. I propose a methodology that has 4 dimensions. 1, mediation. And that mediation should be analytic. In this analytic proposition, it will consider African reality for what it is. It came yesterday, it had come up today. We must do original African engagement and not replacement of constructs, but what is it interrogating? We must have a humanetics that also draw from our own categories, Christian categories. For Africa, one of the ecclesiastical categories is the category of church as a family of God. What does it mean in intent? In providing both social, economical, and psychological assistance to the migrants. And then practical, we must also find our spaces in those places where migration are discussed within our countries and beyond. Third, we should be having experience sharing and cross-cultural learnings. In this case, we must be open. We must open ourselves to what other people are doing. As I said, North America is doing so well. We know of Xris, and we know also of Grody, who have done so much integration of migration using narratives from their own experience and then using Christian spirituality to draw that. And finally, I think what I propose here also is the departure from the prevalent neo-scholastic didactic that is still teaching us Christian theology from the point of view of what they say it is and not what we are feeling. And this is where, even when we do that, with all the enculturations we talked about, we still see Africa very much suffering with African-rooted theology. And somebody was saying, asking somebody yesterday, are you still propagating the theology of the ancestors, which is using the ancestor to replace Jesus as brother or Jesus as dad? It's not solving our problem. The question is, how does our faith respond to this reality so that a migrant does not see him, using migration as an example, does not see himself as a tool to be expended. When I am useful, you call me. When I am not useful to you, you delete my number. I stop here and ask you the question, in case you are interested in continuing this conversation. My question again is, what are your own local practical realities of migration in your community here and there back home? What are we doing or hearing that other people are doing in that regard? What is lacking, and how can that gap be filled? And how do we improve what the church is doing so far? Remembering that the goal is towards a sustainable action with a sustainable impact. Thank you.
Open it first to ask him where is he from originally. Yeah, you go first. I go first.
The Africa Youth Report that I mentioned earlier said, found out that 60% of African Gen Zs want to move out of Africa.
Yes.
I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, that is what I refer to the Nigerian phenomenon, or what we call the syndrome. This is the Japa syndrome. That is the reason why they want to leave is because of the lack of opportunity. You know, we often say poverty. We don't use poverty as just lack of food and others. We're talking about opportunity for you to become what you want to. You know, if you look at the history of those who are moving, many a times there are even people who already have some gained employment in their local places. But it is no longer sufficient that you are working in the bank. It's no longer sufficient that you are an SA to somebody. But you know that you cannot get home with that assurance of security. You cannot even use the money that you realize from that way to sustain yourself or sustain your dependents, as the case may be. But for the youth, they are seeing every day the shrinking of the space for them to engage, both in socio-economic dimension as well as the political issues. The last election in Nigeria have torn down what we call any wall of patriotism. So anybody who is interested and still think one opportunity to move. As I said, they ask you, just for somebody who hears that I work in migration space, they call me up. Or if I'm doing a radio program, a TV program, I get calls. So how can you help us move? I said, that is not what I'm working on. I said, move to where? I say, anywhere, just give me a visa anywhere I can go. So that is what we are talking about. The reality of what it is that they are suffocating in a situation where, again, we record how many people that are drowned in the Mediterranean Sea or people dying on the Sahara Desert. But one event we had, somebody said, I better die in hope than die here in frustration. Right? So that is what they are up to. They better die in hope that it's not my portion that I will die in the Mediterranean. But if it is, I try, than to fold my hands here and feel like I can't do anything.
Simon. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I think what I am not hearing from your presentation is a strategic weaponization of migration by Western powers to serve their depleting workforce. For example, the UK, Canada, Australia, the United States have strategic visa lottery set up. And if you check the age range of this visa, the people who qualify and the type of employment are the strategic employments that really advance a nation beyond where it is economically. And it's the workforce of that particular, when you are most productive, that these visa lotteries there. Now, for example, Nigeria, as an example, Nigeria had a crisis prior to the recent election because they couldn't even have enough computer specialists to really articulate protection of the currency, because most of the IT experts have literally been received by UK and Australia and all that. So as the church works on migration and all that stuff, how much effort has the church asked the question, how do we deconstruct the nation state in Africa? Because the state can be a force of power to counterbalance what the Western powers are doing in Africa's migration system as it's playing out there. Or is the church jettisoning itself, seeing itself as not a voice that can do that type of work? I'm just curious.
Okay, let me start in the church, in the global church, right? The Catholic Church, especially the Holy See Mission at the United Nations, is a very key participant on the global migration dialogue. And what it does, like every other member state, is to propose ways. Of course, it promotes the human rights of migrants, as the case may be. And then, as I said, the section on migrants and refugees of the Dicastery of Integral Development is also trying to step down to continents. We have one in Africa, and of course, they will encourage us to engage in this different conversation that is working towards migrational governance. Like I think I heard, I don't know whether it was from Stan or from the presenter earlier, that what we are not seeing is in most of, sometimes even when church is participating in these conversations, we are not seeing a very rounded or grounded theological or biblical framing of what we say that would also encourage both your participants who are Catholics right? Because in those government spaces, there are also those who are ardent Catholics who would say to the nuncio on that, what does the church want us to say at this? So if you just say it like any other person, so they put it on the platform of the political game. Like I just want to say outrightly, whether it is weaponization of migration or not, international relation thrives on alignment of interests. That's the first principle of international relation. So if I know what you have and I know what I need from you, I go forward for it. So, but it is left for you as a bargainer also to say what you want to put out, what you want to get from me. But what we are doing, what we are not getting is a strong bargaining from our people, those who are leaders. And there are so many reasons why they are not doing that. Because the situation as it is favors them. Right? A governor in Nigeria who was campaigning for his last election, one of the things he put out there is I was going to support 4,000 Nigerian youth from his state to go to Germany, to Europe. So if you get the visa, I will pay your flights. You know, and the youth, everybody was shouting that was he was. But how can a government who has responsibility of providing for his people, providing for his people to make a migration a choice and not a necessity, tells you that it's a necessity for you to survive? My contribution is for you to go. So in that case, you don't expect. Yes, the current demography, the demographic impact on migration says that as we continue to see the global north shrink in number, in terms of population, workforce, the same thing is rising. In the population demography is rising in the south, right? By 2050, Africa alone will go beyond, China and India put together, and then the workforce is growing as that large. So where will this workforce be? Whether there is any migration framework or not, you know, in the case of demand and supply, it must always go where demand is needed. So, but what happens when there is no management in the way we are talking about it? We have irregular migration, we have exploitation, we have smuggling. You know, the irregular migration is not just only about crossing through irregular routes. It's about people who, there are people in this country today who are staying an irregular status. Anytime they hear siren, they are running away because either their paper has expired or they are working in a condition that is not contained in their work document. All these things are put forward, and the economy enjoys from it because those who work under the table are paid less than those who work regular jobs. So somehow everybody who is not humanistic in the sense of it wants this situation to remain as it is, whether government, private sector, or any other person.
Yeah, thank you. I think my little study on migrants and refugees, having a kind of done a little study on what Pope Francis is talking about, taking departure from the 2019 migrants message, which just talked about. Yeah, the way I look at migrants and refugees, especially from the global spurs on the international party, just like, these people have nothing actually to offer. They have nothing in there, and it's like what actually push them to be migrants or to move away from their original spurs is a kind of maybe such things have a kind of depleted whatever they have already or endowed with, you know, from the Creator. And that made me to a kind of came up with this paper at the time, which I just published with Asian Horizon, which I try to make a case by saying that migrants and refugees are a great resource for economic and social development of their host countries. Yeah. So in this case, I see the church in this case doing a great job because they kind of open my mind, because I never knew before then that these people are really human beings and they have something in them. Mm-hmm. And their host countries should try as much as possible to integrate and reintegrate them, and possibly create a program for them to develop, and at the end of the day they'll be useful, you know, for them. So, but then, having listened to your paper, yeah, even though you mentioned the church has done it, you know, they tried to help them, but at the same time, they tried to point out the lacuna on the part of the church. Then my question would be, don't you think the church is quite limited in whatever they might try to do? You know, given the globalization nature, you know, quite, maybe you see it as bringing people together, and at the same time, you know, making them to understand, to relate to it, have interdependence, you know, to help each other. But at the same time, we can see the shortfalls or the pitfalls, you know. Pope Francis has talked about it. Benedict XVI has talked about it. Even Stan, I think, in one of his works, I think, tried to kind of corroborate what they said. But what I'm just trying to say that, don't you think the church trying to do what you think or what you think they can do are quite limited? Because they have seen that, looking at the way globalization is structured, maybe they cannot do much as we think.
Okay, I think my first response to...
Sorry, let's add one more.
Okay, beautiful. I think that's better. Yes.
I want to take you back to the central concern of this conference, that is the emerging trends in world Christianity, especially what people have called transitional identity. You know, Peggy Levitt in her book, God Needs No Passport, makes this case that particularly for world Christianity, the question is about belief, belonging, and behavior. Maybe family, friends, and faith when you cross into a new country. Now, there is racism, there's all kinds of belief systems that actually might be a threat or a value. So, as you watch these trends, my question is, in terms of where you see the Christian movement going to, how will these patterns shape how we believe, how we live, and how we relate?
Okay, I will come to the two questions. Let me start with the last one. So I will come back to you. You know, like I said earlier, I want to echo that again. The church is a very strong support group for migrants, right? A very support group. And what I use the example of the Igbo church community in Toronto. That is one of the very practical ways of making migrants not lose their identity, even in their new homes, as against the other way where we could also say, what does America say? It's a melting pot. You know, you are a new community, just become that, right? And then discard who you are. There are flips of each, you know, because if you have a comfort of your place, it makes it difficult for you to integrate with the larger community. But with the first thing every migrant needs is what we call a receiving center, receiving community. And the receiving center and receiving community has been provided by most times the church. And so when you have that place, the first people you meet will be your people who will now take you step by step on how to integrate into the larger community, the new home you have come to. It helps you to do that. There's a work I did, I call it Unpacked Luggage, describing the life of migrants. You know, they are not already settled in where they are. You know, just like you travel with your handbag and you don't know how long you're staying. So why should I unpack? So you leave it there. They are not at home where they are, and the home they left is also not receiving them as home. I remember when sometime there was a vacancy in Siwa, and they were, I think, looking for a rector or something. And I was having a chat with one of my colleagues. I said, that's in some people from here who can apply. You say, you people have run away from here and gone there, and now something coming, you people will come and take it again from us. So how, just like in politics, the Nigerian National Assembly 2 years ago voted overwhelmingly no to diaspora voting.
Oh, really?
Overwhelmingly no. There were 92 people at that meeting. The day they voted, 82 voted no. The other 10 we are trying to say what they want. Why is the issue? Why are these people who have left want to come and participate? Meanwhile, when you need services that you think they can offer, they can bring it. Even helping them to siphon money. That's what I do that. That's what I help people to start the money, help them buy property and all the rest of it. So we are both the good and the bad and the ugly. So in terms of what you are saying, where do we see this dynamism of the world Christianity in terms of using migrants as a point of conversation? I'll see it from 2 points of view. One, which also will relate to the other question. Now, the first reason why people move, apart from those who move voluntarily, the first reason why they move is because the condition is not favorable. Because there is something that is forced migration. It can be economic forced migration, it can be violent soft migration, it can be environmental forced migration. So, and the Global Compact for Migration states, the first article of that is to ensure that we work to reduce the adverse effects, adverse causes of migration, so that migration will be a choice. All right? So, if migration is a choice, you can be comfortable in where you are, and then especially where your practice of faith has to do with the communal relationship of people. The first place you want to see God or encounter God is in your familiar area. And why would you be operated to somewhere else and struggle to do that? So I would want to see the church, right? We are talking about where the church is limited in what it can do much back home. By taking what we had from the last lecture before we left, how intent is the church in confronting the realities that multiply and create all these tendencies for people not to be comfortable at home? It is as simple as, like you said, if I think in 2012 or 2022, when the Nigerian church for the first time came out to march a protest. The Nigerian church, I mean the Catholic church, with all of us wearing our habit and our cassock and march the street of Abuja, was when there was massacre in Benue State and 2 priests were killed. That was when the church came out. But there have been a fillet of number of killings, and nobody came out to say enough is enough until one of us was killed. So is that the only justification to move people to do that? Just like every other thing in migration. We are actually we are also part of the migration flow, as the case may be. So, but coming over to those who have migrated out here, you can also see the faith. Those of you who pastor in communities here will also see how much the presence of migrants have also in living their faith community around you. You could testify to that. The vibes they bring. You know, some people say, I want to go to this church because I like how they sing. These are black people who come here. They have life in them. I remember sometime in Toronto, somebody dressed and gone to church. And another person say, is there anything happening? He said, no, I'm going to church. And you're so well dressed, overdressed. You know, but these are kind of little things that I think are very important. Finally, please, in working on, especially the relationship between the North and the South, right? One of the major issues we are suffering in migration management is what we call externalization of borders. Externalization of the borders and the militarization of border management. What is happening today that is, you are hearing that, 10,000 Nigerians are deported, are rescued from Libya to this place or that. It is simply because the European Union decided that, just like America says, keep them out there before you handle them in here. So, the European Union decided that to be able to make sure they reduce the number of people who they have to deal with in their territory, let's make alliance with Niger, Libya, and Chad, and then Tunisia, so that they will put border in their place. Just like we have the recent relationship between UK and Rwanda. So all these things are blocks put out there, and they make it tougher for people to move. And then instead of stopping irregular migration, it actually multiplies opportunity or tendencies for the syndicates to exploit people. So the church can also, having that voice, both in local, regional, and global spaces, take a strong point. I just made a joke at the last intervention that we think that the church reads. And it pains me each time when we talk of church, we are still referring to, whether we don't mean it yet, we are still referring to those same people. But we can, on our own, without waiting to get the, what do you imprimatur or whatever you call that? What do we used to get that? We start seeking to get new objective uptime or primatur for our work, be able to use our experiences here to build at least the community we serve that are migrants in different forms. Thank you.
Thank you.